aerodynamics, marginal gains, pounds or dollars per watt saved. Now, athletes spend a lot of time honing their position on the bike, as well as the bike itself and the components. Some factors are obvious and worth attention, such as the wheels, the frame or the cockpit, but some are less obvious, such as tyre width. Now, we look at puncture resistance, we look at rolling resistance, but what about aerodynamic drag? Is it even worth bothering with? How much difference does it make? And what can we do about it? Well, we thought we'd take a look. Now, clearly the frontal area of a tyre mounted to a wheel is a lot less than your bike or you on your bike. And so the aero gains that we're going to have will be a lot smaller and a lot more marginal. So it's not going to be something we can measure out on the road ourselves. And well, we don't have a wind tunnel and due to COVID restrictions at the moment, even if we did, we wouldn't be able to use it. Plus, the wheel is, as we know, a rotating object, and this really does complicate the impact, the aerodynamic impact of objects that we mount to it. So basically what I'm saying is that we're not going to work this out ourselves. We're going to speak to an aerodynamic expert to see what we can learn. So we're very lucky to have Xavier Disley from Aero Coach here. Xav is the founder of Aero Coach, which is based here in the UK, and you'll see his products, the wheels as he's got in the background, on bikes all around the world, from amateur athletes all the way through to world tour teams. So it's an absolute honour to have you, and we've got a few questions for you really on tyre width and just how does tyre width affect aerodynamics?
Well, I think that the thing about, first of all, hello and thanks for having me on. The thing about tyre width and aerodynamics is that there's quite a few factors in play which will affect how your tyres affect the aerodynamics of the whole system of the bike. So if we think about how the airflow works over the bike, obviously everything that happens at the front of the bike in terms of the tyres and wheels is a bit more important than what happens at the back, where the airflow is a bit more kind of disrupted, and changing your tyre width on the rear wheel isn't going to have as much of an impact as the front wheel. In terms of looking at how tyres impact the aero of the front wheel, it depends on the wheel itself, and it also depends on the kind of model and the shape of the tyre. So some tyres have different profiles to them, whether that's a different kind of tread or a different kind of casing and shape. So some tyres are a little bit more kind of like pointed than other tyres, whereas some like cotton casing tyres tend to be a bit more kind of rounded, a bit more bulbous. The different kinds of tyres will impact the aerodynamics, not just things like width.
Okay, that's great. But width is a large factor, and that might depend on. It's not necessarily a case of wider or narrower is more aerodynamic, but is that something to do with rim width as well, or?
Exactly, yeah. And so the most optimal width for the particular wheel that you're using is going to depend on that wheel. So some wheels are designed specifically for wider tyres. Then a wider tyre is going to be more aerodynamic than having a tyre that's so narrow that it doesn't spread out properly. And manufacturers these days are quite good at telling people that the optimal tyre width for their wheels, both from a safety perspective, but also an aero perspective.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question really. How do you know what's optimal for you and what should you really be looking at? So you said a lot of manufacturers will say that and it'll be on their website. What else should you be looking for really when you're making that decision?
So the first thing you should do is check with the manufacturer, because manufacturers will also sometimes have like not only recommendations, but also tyres that they might not want you to use on their rims for whatever reason. For example, if you've got hookless rims, then some tyres will be incompatible. So the best thing to do is to check first, and you'll get recommendations there. But also depending on what you're going to be using the wheel for. So if you're riding really bumpy roads, really broken surfaces, and you want to use the wheel in training and you want a bit more comfort, certainly for things like long distance triathlon where you need a little bit more comfort in your wheels, then running a wider tyre, even though it might be a little bit of an aerodynamic penalty, that might be a better overall option for you rather than running something that may be a couple of watts faster aero from an aero perspective, but maybe a little bit less comfortable. Because remember, for a wider tyre, you can run a slightly lower pressure for the same performance. So that'll be a little bit more comfy to ride.
Okay, and that's something we've seen certainly over the last 5 or 10 years just become more and more popular. Lower pressures and wider tyres on, up to the highest level. Just how much difference can it make though?
So I think that from an aero point of view, obviously, if you did have a wheel that was very narrow with a tyre that was very narrow, then overall that'll be more aero than a tyre that's 35 mil wide with a wheel that's 35 mil 40 mil wide or something. But that's only because the combination of the tyre rolling resistance and the aero come together. And these days, manufacturers are spending so much of their tyre manufacturers are spending so much of their time on optimizing tyres in the kind of 25 mil range that the choice of tyres in very, very narrow options are kind of falling away. But we're only talking a few millimeters here. And from an aero perspective, yes, you might see an aero penalty of, sometimes we've seen a 3 mil, getting a tyre width wrong by about 3 millimeters can cost up to 5 watts at 45k an hour. But if you're traveling a bit slower than that, the wattage differences decrease a bit to maybe a handful of watts. And if you're willing to give up a handful of watts from a comfort point of view to go for a slightly maybe suboptimal aero tyre that provides you with more comfort, then that could be a better option for you.
And if I've understood you correctly, really the difference that the rolling resistance can make will easily outweigh any aero benefits that you can get if you've not got the rolling resistance right.
Yeah, that's right. So if you have a very, let's say you have a narrow tyre, but the rolling resistance on that particular tyre is terrible, then it won't be overall, the whole system won't be as fast as a slightly wider tyre that might be less aero, but which has a better rolling resistance. But yeah, choosing rolling resistance as one of those factors is dead important, as well as things like puncture resistance and stuff, because there's no point having a fast tyre if you flat on it all the time.
I guess that's part of the tyre sort of decision, the decision matrix is it's weighing up all of those different things, and aerodynamics of tyre width is just one part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Is there anything else you think that we should take into account when we are looking at the aerodynamics of a tyre and rolling resistance, or is that?
If you're using an older wheel set, for example, which has a slightly narrower internal rim width, so we describe that as more like kind of 17, 16 millimeters, then a narrower tyre is going to be better for that wheel, and a wider tyre might spread out a little bit too much, and certain very wide tyres won't be rated for those narrow rims anyway. But the wider your wheel goes, the wider you can allow your tyre to be in order to have the kind of best combination.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's actually, when you're looking from an aerodynamics point of view, if you hold your wheel in front of you, you want that straight line between the tyre and the rim. Is that right?
Yeah, you can afford to be a little bit wider, a couple of mil wider than the rim, because most rims these days from the brake track tend to kind of extend out a little bit, and they tend to bow out slightly. But yeah, so you can afford to be a little bit wider. What you don't want to do is to be like 5 mil wider than the size of your brake track. And you don't want to be too much narrower than the size of your brake track too, because then you run the risk of hitting the top of the brake track on a pothole or something, because it's not protected by the tyre if it's too narrow. So if you don't know the specification of your wheel, your particular wheel that you're using, just measure the brake track and then make sure you choose a tyre that's kind of roughly similar, and you can be a couple of mil wider than that if you want to, without really too much of a penalty.
Thank you very much, Sav. That is incredibly helpful. It's been insightful for me as well. I've sort of had these assumptions that I've made over time, but not properly tested them and quizzed someone like yourself on them. So thank you very much for your time, and hopefully people will find that useful and can put it into practice when selecting their next set of tyres. Well, I found that very interesting. I mean, it's something I've always heard talked about, but I've never taken the time to educate myself on the considerations and the real impact that it can have. If it's a question of pounds or dollars per watt saved, then it really is free speed, as it's not about spending extra money, but about making the right choice for your wheel. And Zav mentioned a lot in that interview, and I hope that it now feels like less of a minefield when you go out and select the next set of tyres for your race wheels. Tyres and wheels are trending to be wider now, so although a narrower tyre wheel combination will always be more aero, choices for those are reduced as manufacturers are focusing on wider options. This means overall a wider combination will probably be faster, as the combined benefit of aerodynamics and rolling resistance will outweigh the aero gains on their own. Wider tyres can also be run at lower pressure for the same performance, giving you a comfort benefit. And if this allows you to stay in the TT position for longer or run better off the bike, then this would more than pay for itself in overall speed. Finally, we touched on how to make the right decision. Wheel manufacturers often make recommendations for their wheels, but you can also speak to a good local bike shop or measure the brake tracks yourself. A good sense check is to have a look once you've got the tyre mounted onto the rim. They should be pretty well vertically aligned, with allowance for the tyre to be just a couple of millimetres wider than the rim. From there, there's a good selection of combinations out there on the market that are good and fast, and really you need to focus on avoiding the key pitfalls that we've discussed. From there, it's a balance of comfort, rolling resistance and puncture resistance, and those are decisions that you need to make based on your own priorities, goals, and perhaps the bike courses of the races that you're targeting. I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts are and what you prioritise when making your tyre choice, so let us know in the comments below. Also, I hope this video has been useful when it comes to selecting your next set of race tyres. Don't forget to give us a big thumbs up if you've enjoyed this video, comment below, and don't forget to subscribe.